I'm Janice Petersen. This is SBS World News. Good evening. Former United States President Donald Trump appears to be on track for a historic comeback to the White House. After a divisive presidential campaign, America's electors turned out in large numbers. And while the counting is not over yet, the path is narrow for Vice President Kamala Harris to become the first female president of the United States. Earlier, her supporters left her Election Day event in Washington. Her campaign says she won't be speaking tonight. Shortly, we'll be joined by our correspondents in Washington, D.C. and in New York. And we'll also have the latest reaction from Australia. And a short time ago, Donald Trump spoke to his supporters at his headquarters at Mar-a-Lago in Florida. Let's hear from him now.
What are we checking?
These are our friends.
My script at the moment has Trump.
Incredible movement. This was a movement like nobody's ever seen before. And frankly, this was, I believe, the greatest political movement of all time. There's never been anything like this in this country and maybe beyond. And now it's going to reach a new level of importance because we're going to help our country heal. We're going to help our country heal. We have a country that needs help, and it needs help very badly. We're going to fix our borders. We're going to fix everything about our country. And we made history for a reason tonight, and the reason is going to be just that. We overcame obstacles that nobody thought possible, and it is now clear that we've achieved the most incredible political thing. Look what happened. Is this crazy? But it's a political victory that our country has never seen before, nothing like this. I want to thank the American people for the extraordinary honor of being elected your 47th president and your 45th president. And to every citizen, I will fight for you, for your family, and your future. Every single day, I will be fighting for you, and with every breath in my body, I will not rest until we have delivered the strong, safe, and prosperous America that our children deserve and that you deserve. This will truly be the golden age of America. That's what we have to have. This is a magnificent victory for the American people that will allow us to make America great again.
Well, let's join our correspondent, Ben Lewis. He's joining us from Washington. Good evening. Ben, an extraordinary day in American history. We heard there from Donald Trump. He is declaring himself the 47th president of the United States. What's your take on this history-making day?
Janice, an extraordinary day and perhaps the most extraordinary comeback in the history of American politics. Donald Trump will be returning to the White House. Just a few hours ago, before polls closed, Democrats were feeling confident. They were concerned that Donald Trump would try to claim victory prematurely. Well, he has claimed it, and rightly so. Let's take a look at how the Electoral College votes stand at the moment. According to Associated Press, Donald Trump on 267, Kamala Harris on 214. He will easily clear that 270 vote benchmark required to enter the White House. To the swing states now, North Carolina was the first one that was called. Donald Trump winning that relatively comfortably, despite the fact that the Democratic candidate for governor there has won his race. Georgia was called not long after for Donald Trump. The Harris campaign will be very disappointed there. They put a lot of effort into wooing including African-American voters in Atlanta over the last few weeks. Then there's Nevada. Again, Democrats were hopeful there, but Donald Trump has done very well with Latino voters, particularly male Latino voters in that Sun Belt state. In Arizona, again, Donald Trump with a small but relatively comfortable lead there. Moving on to the blue wall states. Michigan, Donald Trump ahead there again. Remember, many Muslim voters in that state, many were furious with the Biden-Harris administration for their handling of Israel's war on Gaza and in Lebanon and decided to stay home or to vote third party. Then there's Wisconsin, Donald Trump seemingly doing reasonably well there as well. And then there is the big prize in the blue wall, Pennsylvania, called by the Associated Press not all that long ago. Extraordinary given the enormous ground game Democrats had in that particular state. 24 hours ago, one of the chief advisors to the Harris campaign had said they thought they could win all 7 swing states. It hasn't worked out that way. In Washington, D.C., just before 1 a.m, crestfallen crowds streamed out of the Democrat campaign headquarters, told the woman they'd been waiting all night for would not address them.
We still have votes to count. We still have states that have not been called yet. We will continue overnight to fight to make sure that every vote is counted, that every voice has spoken. So you won't hear from the Vice President tonight, but you will hear from her tomorrow.
In the early hours of the count, Donald Trump surged ahead, riding the familiar red wave that has marked the last 2 elections. Safe Republican states called in quick succession for the former president before polls had even closed on the West Coast.
On the race to 270, Donald Trump has 154 electoral votes. Kamala Harris has 81 electoral votes.
The numbers hyping up the Trump camp.
I'll tell you, the vibes here on the ground, we're talking to voters today too, this feels a lot like the 2016 vibes as you see the results coming in.
Celebratory scenes gathering momentum into the night. And then the first major win.
CNN projects that Donald Trump will win the state of North Carolina. This is the first of 7 battleground states that we're keeping an eye on.
A very different atmosphere at Harris headquarters in Washington.
And I think the operative word right now is silence. There's not a lot being said because the Harris team appears to be searching for bright spots in the map as these results very, very slowly come in.
At the start of the day, enthusiasm was evident. Long lines forming quickly as the first polling booths opened across the East Coast. Voters showing their support in a myriad of ways.
I'm definitely for, Donald Trump, obviously. It's important for him to get back in office, for me, to secure our borders, to help our economy, to get back to where we were.
Kamala Harris, of course. We can say a lot about Kamala. She's to me, she's a phenomenal black woman. She would make history if she wins. This would make history for the world.
Ballots even arriving from outer space.
You bet. I actually voted early a couple of weeks ago. So got my ballot in and make sure that mine got counted.
Machine malfunctions and hoax bomb threats caused delays, extending voting hours at some polling centres. But the day otherwise going ahead without a hitch. Kamala Harris was all smiles arriving at Democratic headquarters.
This is just the best. Would you mind staying up? Thank you all so very much.
Speaking to voters on the phone. Tim Walz and his family making one last stop in Pennsylvania, the key swing state central to both candidates' paths to victory. Donald Trump's motorcade was seen pulling into West Palm Beach, Florida early on Tuesday, before arriving at a polling site, signature hat on, wife Melania by his side, projecting confidence.
I feel very confident. I have felt. We went in with a very big lead today. And it looks like Republicans have shown up in force.
He was asked whether he'd accept a loss.
If I lose an election, if it's a fair election, I'd be the first one to acknowledge it. And I think so far, I think it's been fair. I think there's been A lot of court cases. Both sides are lawyered up. Thousands of lawyers are involved.
Running mate JD Vance also optimistic after voting in his home state of Ohio, taking a line out of the Democrat playbook, speaking of healing a divided America.
The best way to heal the rift in the country is to try to govern the country as well as we can, create as much prosperity as we can for the American people, and remind our fellow Americans that we are all fundamentally on the same team, however we voted.
Votes are still being tallied, but Donald Trump has reason to feel confident.
Ben, we expected a very close election, but has the way that this has all unfolded been a surprise for you?
Look, it has to some degree, but as the polls closed, the warning signs were there for Democrats. We saw that Donald Trump was actually outperforming his performance in 2020 by 3 to 4 points in many rural areas in these 7 key swing states. Now, to counter that, Kamala Harris really needed to run up the tally in suburban and dense city areas, and that simply wasn't happening. Now, there'd been a lot talked about Donald Trump increasing his support among black voters. It appears that has not really been the case. However, he has had enormous success with Latino voters. Back in 2020, Joe Biden won Latino voters by 33 points. Today, exit polls suggest Kamala Harris has won Latino voters by just 8, and that a majority of Latino men in swing states backed Donald Trump. The other thing to keep in mind are the issues that voters thought were important. We talked a lot about democracy, about reproductive rights. One thing we noticed travelling the country was a lot of people were talking about the economy, saying that they felt it was better when Donald Trump was in office, that even though the numbers might look good at the moment, they don't feel it when they go to the supermarket. Donald Trump started all of his rallies over the last few weeks with the same line, saying, "Do you feel better? Are you more comfortable than you were 4 years ago?" It appears that was very much a winning strategy.
It definitely had cut through. Thanks so much. That's our Chief International Correspondent, Ben Lewis, joining us from Washington, DC. But let's bring in our correspondent, Prue Lewan, joining us from New York tonight. Prue, this is a far cry from the Democrats' expectations. How did we get here?
A very good evening to you, Janice. What an extraordinary story. The man from New York has adopted New York tactics, which is that you never give in, you never say you've done the wrong thing, and you fight, fight, fight. And he has won. What an extraordinary comeback. And the rest of the United States, that is to say, his opponents have to acknowledge that Donald Trump is now political royalty in the United States, an extraordinary comeback. So to answer your question, that's the question for the Democrats. What do they do? Because in these days, even though maybe it looked like it was incredibly close, there was a feeling of momentum. And that was because she absolutely outraised Kamala Harris, outraised Donald Trump. That meant she could outspend Donald Trump. Pennsylvania was blanketed with advertising all the time. In terms of their ground game, Ben's talked about this. It was better. They had more people on the ground. They had more officers. And yet they have not repeated 2020. They have repeated 2016. What does it mean for women? Will the Democrats ever again put up a presidential candidate who's a female? And then there's the issue. Joe Biden said, I'm the only one, effectively, he said that, who can take on Donald Trump because I'm the guy from Scranton, Pennsylvania, and I will win it for you. The problem was Democrats are now already saying that there wasn't a primary process. So if they had dumped Kamala Harris, then that would have been alienating to women who would have said, hang on, you're just going past the woman. But they didn't have a competitive process. Remember what Kamala tried to do. She was campaigning with Liz Cheney, one of the most conservative people from the Republican side. And there they were saying it's safe for Republican and independent suburban women to come on board. Maybe they did. Yes, they did. But buy enough to counteract what Ben was talking about in terms of Latino voters? No, they didn't. Then take on board, for example, Michelle Obama. She's one of this country's most popular figures, a great orator. There she was saying to men, don't let us down. And yet we know that black men supported Biden more than they've supported Kamala Harris. And then finally, just in terms of the normal metrics that we would use in, say, for example, debate performance. In the one debate, it was considered that Trump did poorly against Kamala Harris. He was asked about his plans. He said, I have concept of a plan. And yet here we are tonight. His speech is still going on right now in Florida. His family is all around him. And this is a new dynasty. Because remember, when he wins the first time, it seems a little bit, okay, a maverick, a scrappy kind of presidency. They know what they're doing this time. And just one final point. A couple of weeks ago, Elon Musk at the Madison Square Garden rally was asked, what will you do? He said, I'll cut $2 trillion from US spending. Big things are about to happen.
And Prue, how's the race for the House and Senate looking at the moment?
Oh, Janice, that feeds completely into that, which is they've got the Senate. That means Republicans have managed to take that back, which means they have the capacity to appoint new Supreme Court justices. So here's something that Donald Trump would be looking at. Remember, he appointed 3 in his first term. There are 2 justices who are in their 70s. Yes, they are conservatives, but if they retire and they are replaced by justices, conservative obviously, who are endorsed, who are nominated, put up by Donald Trump, he would put in justices who are younger, who therefore will take the conservative bench for many decades to come. He would be the first president of the United States since FDR to appoint 5 of the court's 9 justices. As for the House, it's still up in the balance. Janice.
Republicans needed to win only 2 seats to regain control of the Senate, where Democrats held a 51-49 majority. Their first victory came early in West Virginia, with the state's popular governor, Jim Justice, replacing Democrat-turned-independent Joe Manchin, who is retiring. Ohio also turned red, with businessman Bernie Moreno beating 3-term Democrat Sherrod Brown in one of the most expensive campaigns this cycle.
This is a new dawn of Republican leadership. With President Trump and J.D. Vance in the White House,
Democrats also spent a fortune hoping to unseat Republican Ted Cruz in Texas.
The people of Texas have spoken. And their message rings clear as a bell across our great state. Texas will remain Texas.
The picture is less clear in the House. Democrats only need to pick up 4 seats to take control of the chamber. But it could be days before the final tally is known. If Democrats do take control, Hakeem Jeffries will become the first black Speaker of the House. History has already been made in the Senate, where Democrats Angela Orso Brooks of Maryland and Lisa Blunt Rochester of Delaware will become the first 2 black women to serve simultaneously in the chamber.
And I stand here tonight for all those people who dream of a better day. We stand tonight united as one Maryland. And to each and every Marylander, I say this: I will make your care my concern, your hope my focus, and your dreams my work in the days and years to come.
And in the House, Democrat Sarah McBride becomes the country's first openly transgender person elected to the chamber. Democrats had made abortion rights a central plank of their campaign. Those rights are on the ballot in 9 states. While New York voted to protect access, in Florida, voters rejected creating a constitutional right to abortion, the measure needing 60% to pass.
The vast majority of Floridians, 57%, say no to an extreme abortion ban.
The United States as divided as ever. Prue Luan, SBS World News.
Dozens of hoax bomb threats have been made at polling stations in 5 of 7 key US swing states. The FBI says many are linked to Russia, claims the Russian embassy in Washington has dismissed as malicious slander. Some US state officials say the threats are an attempt to undermine democracy.
As voting got underway in the battleground state of Georgia, several polling booths were temporarily evacuated due to hoax bomb threats.
We planned heavily for the incident of a bomb threat being called in, and it's a good thing we did because that's the only thing that happened today was 32 bomb threats at different polling locations. 32.
Similar threats made too in Pennsylvania.
This is part of a persistent, coordinated attempt to call in bomb threats to swing states in order to disrupt the election.
US officials say some threats were made through 911 calls. The FBI says many appeared to originate from Russian email domains, and that none of the threats have been determined to be credible thus far.
Definitely is something that makes me scared. I didn't know about it prior, so thankfully I didn't have time to think about it, but I did hear about the ones in Fulton County, which is just honestly insane that we're still kind of dealing with stuff like this.
These are bomb threats that are being called in to largely Democratic precincts in Georgia, especially in Fulton County and DeKalb County, which are very heavily black precincts or very heavily black counties.
Voting hours have been extended at several sites to make up for the disruption. The Republican National Committee and Georgia Republican Party filing a motion to attempt to stop that from happening. Donald Trump also taking to his Truth Social platform, claiming there had been electoral cheating in Philadelphia. State authorities debunking that claim.
The allegations about massive cheating in Philadelphia are absolutely false. There's no evidence whatsoever of massive cheating.
Social media has played a large role in this election. Elon Musk, who acquired X in 2022, officially endorsed Donald Trump in July.
After Elon Musk bought Twitter, now X, the algorithm changed to provide much more right-wing content. We saw an analysis a few days ago where posts that were going viral were much more likely to be right-wing media versus center or on the left.
Concerns about Russian interference became a major part of the dispute over the 2016 election, confirmed in 2017 by a joint report from the CIA, FBI and NSA. While experts say recent bomb threats might not be part of a coordinated misinformation campaign, the FBI is warning the American people to be wary of inauthentic uses of its name following the release of a fabricated statement and videos. Hannah Kwon, SBS World News.
Coming up, watching closely the reaction to the unfolding election result in Canberra. Israel's Prime Minister sacks the Defence Minister. So what's behind the sudden move? And the state of the US economy on Election Day and the challenges ahead for a new US president. The Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, has moved quickly to assure the Parliament he can work with whoever takes the White House. The results are raising political and economic questions about the impact on Australia's relationship with its closest diplomatic and security ally.
Anticipation and anxiety.
It's been nerve-wracking.
It's a Trump rump at the moment.
It's a roller coaster.
A ride watched on half a world away.
People often like to look at it like it's happening in an American vacuum, but I think that it's having really real, tangible consequences.
In an election seen as one of the most consequential in modern history, US Ambassador to Australia Caroline Kennedy, the daughter of JFK, Democratic Party royalty, not stating the obvious.
Well, I'm not allowed to say, but I know who I voted for, so we'll leave it there.
High inflation worldwide and economic pain felt by millions. Ambassador Kennedy drawing parallels.
Well, like Australia, I think that our economy is in better shape than people feel like it is in their own personal circumstances. It's hard, and so it takes a while for that to get the inflation rate down.
Anthony Albanese's past criticism of Mr. Trump resurfaced days ago, but the Prime Minister insisting mateship between the two nations remains strong.
The alliance between Australia and the United States has always been bigger than individuals that have stood tall through generations of governments from both sides of the aisle.
Whatever the outcome, we know that for our relationship with the United States, it will endure.
As counting continues, the possibility of another Trump presidency is dawning in Canberra. Mr. Trump's protectionist and at times volatile approach to foreign policy is a prospect even allies of the United States will have to confront, like his threat to impose tariffs on all imports.
We're not a superpower, so we like predictable trading arrangements, and that has been actually central to how Australia has developed as a nation.
The world we once were trying to build on is changing, and we'll just have to react and change with it.
Uncertainty too about what it will mean for global security, from the former Prime Minister pivotal to negotiating the AUKUS nuclear submarine deal.
And I know President Trump will be great for global security and will be great for Australia.
This prediction from India's Minister for External Affairs.
The kind of I would say, dominance and generosity which the US had in the early days may not continue to be the norm.
Pablo Vinales, SBS World News.
SBS Chief Political Correspondent Anna Henderson joins us now. Good evening, Anna. What will the government's reaction be to the likely outcome of this election?
Well, Janice, it is no secret the Labor government would have had a much smoother working relationship with Kamala Harris as president. Their agendas and political ideologies were in sync. So an expected Donald Trump victory, even though it was, according to the polls, a 50-50 possibility, is causing what I would say is some mild panic in Canberra because of the many ways known and unknown it could impact on Australia's politics and even the next federal election. Donald Trump was president alongside Malcolm Turnbull as Prime Minister and then Scott Morrison. They were both Liberal leaders. This Labor government will now get to work. Anthony Albanese has never met Donald Trump. If this result is confirmed, that will need to change. The Prime Minister is being urged to pick up the phone as soon as possible to the likely victor and make a visit to Washington as soon as he can. In 2017, Anthony Albanese said he was scared of Donald Trump. Australia's ambassador in Washington, Kevin Rudd, has called him nuts. So bridges will need to be built. There has been a debate about whether Donald Trump would honour the AUKUS deal, seek to renegotiate it, or withhold the nuclear-powered submarines altogether. The bigger issue, though, is economic. A resurgent Trump presidency could bring with it an increase in global inflation and tariffs that would hit China hard and, by association, could embroil Australia in a trade war. China is our biggest trading partner. We know Treasury has been modelling possible outcomes. And look at the timing in the lead up to the next federal election. Labor is keenly aware that the cost of living argument appears to have resonated deeply. We are starting to see similar lines coming from Peter Dutton as part of his attack on the government's economic management, that people were better off before Labor was elected. Overall, this is an endorsement within the US of a more isolationist America. In Australia, both parties know what polling experts like Redbridge are tracking, a clear trend of the decoupling of voters in regional and outer urban areas with the left of politics. The reasons why are still being assessed, and they will determine how the next election here is fought. Janice.
Thanks so much. Our Chief Political Correspondent Anna Henderson updating us there from the newsroom. Well, the presidential election is, of course, being watched closely right around the world, including in Asia, where a new leader of the United States could have implications for geopolitics in the region. Asia correspondent Aaron Fernandez joins us now from Jakarta. Good evening, Aaron. What are the main concerns in that region?
Janice, good evening. Well, there are several strategic flashpoints across the region, and the US-China relationship is central to each of those. Most notably Taiwan. Joe Biden went further than any other US president has ever done by declaring that the United States would intervene militarily to defend Taiwan if it were invaded by China. Traditionally, US leaders have remained ambiguous on that question, and it's unlikely that Donald Trump Trump would make similarly unequivocal statements. We may hear from the new US administration calls for its partners in Asia to contribute more to their defence arrangements, including for covering the costs of hosting US military bases in Japan and South Korea. The South China Sea has been another flashpoint. There's been consistent skirmishes between China and the Philippines, which has a mutual defence treaty with the United States. And also on the Korean Peninsula, Donald Trump had an unconventional relationship with Kim Jong-un that ultimately didn't yield any political benefits. So it will be interesting to see what the approach is there. More broadly, countries like Indonesia, where I am, they want to see more foreign investment in their infrastructure and in their economies, and they'll take that investment wherever they find it, including from China if the United States is less engaged in the region. And lastly, of course, is the question of tariffs. The promise to impose tariffs on goods imported into the United States is being watched by so many export economies here in Asia. Janice.
Thanks so much. That's our Asia correspondent, Aaron Fernandez, updating us from Jakarta. Two other stories now, and the Australian government will introduce emergency legislation tomorrow as it seeks to circumvent a High Court ruling which found that the use of ankle bracelets and curfews on former immigration detainees is unconstitutional.
Ankle bracelets and 8-hour curfews, conditions lawyers for a former immigration detainee have described as degrading and punitive. Today, the High Court agreed.
It's a major victory for fundamental freedoms and the rule of law in Australia. Under our Constitution, it is only the courts and not the government that can impose punishment.
The ruling comes a year after the landmark NZYQ case, which deemed indefinite detention illegal, prompting the release of 152 non-citizens with no reasonable prospect of deportation. Now, 215 former detainees are on bridging visas, subject to curfews and electronic monitoring. Today's ruling relates to a stateless man known as YBFZ, but will impact the whole cohort, many of whom have served jail sentences only to then spend years in immigration detention.
The government must now act immediately to abide by the ruling and remove the conditions from all people subject to them.
As the coalition asks,
how is the government going to keep the Australian community safe from these 215 hardened criminals?
Convicted murderers and sex offenders among them.
Our first preference when you cancel someone's visa is you want them to leave the country. And I'm wanting to strengthen our powers to be able to do that.
The Home Affairs Minister this afternoon signing regulations to allow monitoring to continue, with emergency laws to boost deportation powers to be tabled tomorrow. As Labor seeks a legal solution that both responds to community concerns and keeps coalition attacks at bay, the High Court's latest ruling has underscored a simple principle: citizen or not, in Australia, everyone has the same constitutional rights. Sarah Timevska, SBS World News.
While much of the world's attention is on the US, there have also been developments. Of course, Israel's Prime Minister has controversially fired his Defence Minister, Yoav Gallant. Benjamin Netanyahu's critics accuse him of putting politics ahead of national security, as Gallant was widely considered to be a brake on far-right factions. It wasn't Netanyahu's first attempt to fire the former military general. This time, he says, though, he has the support of most of the government.
Such protests saved the Defence Minister's skin before.
Tonight is a spontaneous outburst of rage.
Angry crowds outside the Prime Minister's home calling him a traitor.
Bibi fired Gallant just to keep himself safe, not to keep this country safe.
Many say without Yoav Gallant, the remaining hostages will never be returned.
And this firing of the only minister that still had some thoughts about the hostages is completely BS.
Despite the support, the former general conceding defeat, saying Benjamin Netanyahu fired him in part for ordering the conscription of ultra-Orthodox Jews.
הפיטורים הללו מגיעים כתוצאה ממחלוקת
על שלושה נושאים. הראשון, עמידתי הנחרצת על כך שכל מי שנמצא בגיל הגיוס הינו חייב גיוס.
The other two, his calls for a state inquiry into the security failures which enabled the October 7 attack. And his very public criticism of Netanyahu for failing to compromise and bring back hostages.
עשיתי ניסיונות רבים לגשר על הפערים הללו, אבל הם הלכו והתרחבו. הם הגיעו גם לידיעת הציבור בדרך לא מקובלת, וגרוע מזה, הם הגיעו לידיעת האויב.
Calls for a ceasefire have grown since Israel's enemy number one, Yahya Sinwar, was killed, along with dozens of other senior Hezbollah and Hamas leaders. Netanyahu resisting. Attacks on Gaza have killed at least 61 people in the past 24 hours, according to the Palestinian Ministry of Health. While Lebanon's health officials say Israel killed 15 people in an apartment outside Beirut and struck the seaside town of Jiyeh. Israel Katz is expected to take over Israel's war effort in 48 hours. He lacks extensive military experience, but is a Netanyahu loyalist. Protesters calling for Katz to bring home the hostages, Katz promising to do so while welcoming his appointment, but made no mention of a ceasefire. Only the defeat and destruction of Hamas and Hezbollah. Liz Maddock, SBS World News.
There are concerns for a female student in Iran who's stripped to her underwear at a university in Tehran. A video has been circulating since the weekend that's been widely perceived as a protest against Iran's strict Islamic dress code. The Iranian government says she does not represent a security issue, but they say she is a troubled individual who's receiving treatment.
An apparent act of defiance from this Tehran University student, identified as Ahur Darhieh on social media and reportedly studying French language. It wasn't long until she was detained by security guards, with the university saying she was under mental pressure and had a mental disorder. Some in Iran have expressed their support for her. The incident also attracting protesters in France, with members of the feminist collective Femen also stripping back in solidarity.
She simply snapped and decided to show her courage in face of the horrific laws that have been implemented by the regime and that are going on in the same university.
Iran says they seek to solve the problems of the troubled individual, and it was too soon for the student to return to university. The Iranian embassy in Paris says signs of abnormal behaviour had already been seen by family and students in her year. But there has been criticism of these claims.
It takes the subjectivity of women and their sanity away.
Since September 2022, more Iranian women have taken part in demonstrations across the country after the death in custody of Iranian Kurdish woman Mahsa Amini. She was arrested by morality police for allegedly violating hijab rules.
Just the latest act of dissidence, and one of the boldest ones.
It remains unclear where exactly Ms. Darhieh is being held. Yusuf Saudi, SBS World News.
Police believe the body of 11-year-old Laith Alaid has been located on the New South Wales Central Coast. The boy was trying to cross the entrance channel on Sunday with his father and younger brothers when he was pulled out to sea by a fast-moving current. Emergency services were called to the area this afternoon following reports that a body had been found in the water. It's yet to be formally identified. Let's hear more now from Donald Trump, who's addressed supporters in Florida claiming victory in the 2024 US presidential election. He says he intends to seal the border upon taking office.
We're going to turn our country around, make it something very special. It lost that little thing called special. We have to make it so. We're going to make this so great. It's the greatest country and potentially the greatest country in the world by far. And right now we're going to just work very hard to get all of that back. We're going to make it the best it's ever been. We can do that. If we had to wait longer, I don't know, it was going bad and it was going bad fast. We're going to have to seal up those borders and we're going to have to let people come into our country. We want people to come back in, but we have to let them come back in, but they have to come in legally. They have to come in legally.
Well, let's get the latest on that vote count now and cross to correspondent Prue Luan. She's been following events in New York for us. Good evening, Prue. What sort of presidency is Donald Trump likely to bring?
Janice, well, you just heard he's already promised, hasn't he? The mainstay of his election campaign was that he is promising, and we know it's going to happen because he promised it, the biggest mass deportation of migrants from the United States in American modern history. That will be sending a chill through millions of people in this country tonight. There are estimated to be around 11 million undocumented migrants in the United States. That's a non-partisan estimate from around the year 2021. 11 million people. In terms of his own legal issues, they actually haven't gone away. Next week, November 12, way before the inauguration, which of course is midday, January 20 next year, he's meant to be having the sentencing decision on his court case in New York City, the only one where he's been convicted criminally of 34 felony counts. What is Justice Mélenchon going to do? Will he dismiss it, or will sentencing go ahead for the president-to-be, the 47th president? And finally, in connection to that also, Jack Smith, the special prosecutor, the one from the Department of Justice who was bringing the cases in relation to January 6, Trump has said that he wants him fired immediately and also that he wants to see him deported. Well, unlikely, he's a US citizen, but there are huge things that are about to happen. And of course, these are now the final weeks of the Biden presidency. We'll see how he reacts tomorrow. Janice.
It has been a monumental day in US politics. Thanks so much, Prue Luan, updating us from New York. Well, global shares rallied today with the exception of one major market. SBS Finance editor Ricardo Gonçalves has been following it all right throughout the day. So, Ricardo, it all started on Wall Street even before the polls closed.
Yeah, Janice, the US markets rose on 9 of the last 11 election days, and overnight, all three major indexes rose more than 1%, edging closer to recent record levels, fuelled by some good news about AI demand. And with the share market in good shape, the next US president will also inherit an economy which managed to escape a recession. Annual GDP, while slowing, is at 2.8%, double that of Australia. The jobless rate at 4.1%, the same as Australia. And that inflation rate tumbled from a peak of 9.1% to 2.4%. It's likely to mean further interest rate cuts this week as the US Federal Reserve prepares to meet tomorrow.
The thing is, you have all of this anxiety about the election set against a very favorable backdrop for the market. Strong earnings, soft landing, Fed looking to cut rates this week as well. And so in absence of some other catalyst, I think the trend is going to be higher.
US shares have risen more than 20% so far this year, and the Australian share market took Wall Street's lead, opening higher and holding on to those gains to finish 0.8% firmer. As the day progressed, the US dollar strengthened, so as a result, the Australian dollar weakened and was down more than 1 US cent at one point today. And Bitcoin, which has been embraced by Donald Trump and Republicans, reached a record high. Ben Clark from TMS Capital told me earlier today from the ASX that the market was leaning one way more than another.
Look, I don't think it's as binary as an outcome as it has been in the past. So I don't think there's one candidate who's necessarily bad for markets and one who's great, but certainly Trump would be seen as a better winner for the share market from an investor's point of view. And I think if you look at asset prices leading into this election, there's no doubt that the market has voted that he will win, and positioning is very much with a Trump win.
And while the election is attracting the headlines today, some analysts say it'll be China which ultimately decides the direction of the Australian share market.
The next leg of this rally needs to be driven by the resources companies, and the next leg of that needs to be underpinned by Chinese policy. So we've got Parliament meeting, 4th to the 8th of November, I think it is. So currently in process. We're going to get more detail around Chinese stimulus. I still think they've pulled the whatever it takes lever. They've showed their hand, and that is their intention. So more policy out of Beijing, I think, is going to be the key driver and influence on Australia and where our share market goes in the coming months.
And as for Hong Kong's share market, it was the only major market in the region to fall today, down around 2.5%. Concerns of rising tariffs on Chinese exports into the US. Janice, weighing there.
Thanks so much for the update, Ricardo. Well, coming up, a slice of 70-year-old cake and why it's so highly sought after. Plus, why Liverpool players and fans can't stop smiling at the moment. A rare slice of wedding cake from the marriage of Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip in 1947 is sold at auction for more than $4,000. The fruitcake was discovered in a suitcase that belonged to a housekeeper at a palace in Edinburgh.
From the palace balcony, Elizabeth and her husband waved to the cheering crowds.
November the 20th, 1947. The nation and the world witnessed the wedding of the young Princess Elizabeth and Prince Philip. During the celebrations, the royal couple had several wedding cakes, including this one, with 4 tiers, standing at 9 feet high. Now, 77 years on, a slice of cake thought to be from that day has been discovered. It was stashed under a bed. The story goes that a former housekeeper at Holyrood House in Edinburgh received the cake and kept it until she died in the 1980s. And today it went to auction with a £500 estimate, which was quickly surpassed.
Rare piece of wedding cake here at £2,200 on the telephone in China, 2002. It's a little slither of history. When that was given in 1947, rationing was still going on. Mostly people who would have received a piece of cake like that would have thought, I've got to eat it, particularly if the Queen has just sent it to me.
Whether there is an appetite to eat the cake is unknown, but the appetite to own a slice of royal memorabilia has seen this buyer spend thousands of pounds.
Joe Black with that report. Well, Liverpool's scintillating start to the season has continued, with the Reds now sitting on top of the table in the UEFA Champions League and English Premier League. Arne Slot's side thrashed Bayer Leverkusen 4-0 this morning. Manchester City slumped to a third straight defeat, beaten 4-1 by Sporting Lisbon, while holders Real Madrid were upset at home by AC Milan.
16 games, 14 wins. Arne Slot's start to life at Anfield has been close to perfect.
I couldn't imagine that we won so many games and did so well, not only in terms of winning, but also in terms of performance.
But I believe a lot in my newest club, and we will start from a low level, maybe I can say that, and we will improve the team.
Raam, SBS World News.
Aryna Sabalenka will finish the year as the world's #1 ranked women's player. The 3-time Grand Slam champion is through to the semi-finals of the season-ending WTA finals in Riyadh. It marks the first time that a major professional women's sporting tournament has been held in Saudi Arabia.
As the stars of women's tennis serve up a show in Riyadh, a lot's resting on the promise of sport driving positive change. Despite record prize money for players, the kingdom's reputation has prompted some soul-searching.
Obviously, I'm a woman, and I was very concerned, and my dad honestly was very concerned with me coming here, but I want to see it for myself and see if the change is happening, and then if I felt uncomfortable or felt like it, nothing's happening, then maybe, I probably wouldn't come back.
This country's no stranger to hosting top-level sport, but what makes this significant is it's the first major women's sports event to be held here. Whilst there have been recent reforms, human rights issues remain, and critics claim the WTA has sold its soul by allowing Saudi Arabia to host the crown jewel of women's tennis. The WTA said it was sensitive to concerns about bringing the final somewhere where women's rights are restricted, homosexuality is illegal, and where the appetite for tennis isn't clear. but it said its 3-year deal was justified by players receiving equal prize money to the men and plans to leave a legacy.
Who's from Saudi? Yes?
The ambition here is to get 1 million Saudis engaged in tennis by 2030, helped by camps like this, where budding players train on the same courts as their idols.
We never really had these kind of tournaments and events in Saudi, so for them to finally come is like life-changing.
Yes!
I feel like it's so nice to watch the players this closely, so hopefully one day we can see Saudi females compete in that level.
This will definitely improve the women's chances getting into the sport that they love.
How do you feel when people question Saudi Arabia's suitability as a host of these finals?
We're on a transformation journey and we invite anyone and everyone. I really would love them to come and see for themselves. Seeing is believing.
Beautiful, one more.
The promise is that these women haven't just come to pose, play and get paid, but that they can be a force for good. The critics will take some convincing that prize money hasn't come at the expense of principles.
Laura Scott reporting there from Riyadh. Well, coming up, the weather details and the latest from Washington, D.C. after Donald Trump declares victory against Kamala Harris in the US presidential election. To the weather forecast now. In the major centres, showers ahead for Sydney and Canberra, a shower or two to hit Melbourne, partly cloudy skies in Hobart, showers to clear in Adelaide, partly cloudy skies in Perth and Darwin, and a sunny day ahead for Brisbane. Checking conditions further afield now, thunderstorms in Nundy, rain in Papeete, partly cloudy in Noumea and Wellington. Checking the picture in Southeast Asia now, cloudy skies in Bangkok, thunder in Kuala Lumpur and Singapore, wet in Port Moresby. Heading further north now, clear skies above Beijing and Seoul, drizzle in Taipei, some cloud about Manila. Heading west, mostly sunny skies for Beirut, bit of cloud about Baghdad and foggy in New Delhi. To Europe, it'll be wet and showery in Stockholm, some cloud for London, foggy in Warsaw, fine in Madrid. Checking conditions in Africa now, mostly sunny skies in Cairo and Dakar, showers for Nairobi, thunderstorms in Johannesburg. To South America now, wet and showery in Caracas, some rain ahead in Rio, thunder in Asunción and cloudy in Buenos Aires. And for North America, clear skies above Toronto and Chicago, snowfall in Denver, showers in Miami and Havana. Well, let's return to the US election coverage now for some final thoughts from Chief International Correspondent Ben Lewis. Good evening, Ben. What are the global implications, do you think, of a Donald Trump presidency in the White House?
Well, Janice, foreign affairs barely rated a mention during this campaign, but we know that the Trump foreign policy doctrine will be very different to that of Joe Biden's. There will be some pretty frantic phone calls between European leaders this morning. Of course, in the past, former President, soon-to-be President-elect Trump has questioned whether the United States should be part of NATO. European leaders will likely argue that it shows that they need to invest more in their own defence. Then there is Ukraine. Ukrainian forces will simply be overrun by Vladimir Putin's army if weapons supplies from the United States come to a halt. Donald Trump has said he could end that conflict on day one. If he does, it's unlikely to be on terms that are acceptable to Volodymyr Zelensky and Kiev. Then there is Israel. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is likely to be a very happy man today. He has already passed on his congratulations. He sees Donald Trump as a close ally, perhaps one who would support further military action against Iran.
Thanks so much. That's our Chief International Correspondent Ben Lewis updating us from Washington, D.C. on the global implications of Donald Trump returning to the White House. So recapping that top story now, and Donald Trump has claimed victory over Kamala Harris in the US presidential election 4 years after he left the White House. Addressing supporters in Florida, Donald Trump declared victory and said his campaign was the greatest political moment of all time. That is the world this Wednesday. Raina Saranpait will be back with the latest on the US presidential election just after 10:45 tonight. Till then, good night.